Welcome to Prime Life. We call it Retirement 2.0. Leave each episode with tips and new ideas to help you navigate retirement in our new age. It's your time. Make it count.
Hi, this is Paul Tyler, and welcome to another episode of Prime Life. Joseph, how are you?
Doing great, Paul. Excited for today's conversation.
I am. Laura, good to have you here.
It's great to be back.
And Mary, good to see you. And do you want to introduce our guest and the topic of the day?
Absolutely. I'm thrilled and honored to introduce Dan Tully. He began his career as Assistant Attorney General for the state of Connecticut. He's been practicing eldercare law for over 30 years. He's a partner and co-founder of Eldercare Advocate for Kilbourne and Tully of Connecticut. He has several locations. Dan, tell our audience a bit about yourself and why eldercare is your passion.
Well, Mary, I started my legal career as an Assistant Attorney General for the state of Connecticut. I worked for Senator Joe Lieberman when he was the Attorney General there. And he taught me a lot of valuable lessons. And one was speak in language that people can understand. Don't speak in legalese. And I've always tried to carry that with me through my career. And the nice thing about elder law is that you, at the end of the day, you feel like you're helping people. You can answer a lot of questions. We deal with people who are distraught, who are upset, who are fearful of losing their home and lifetime of savings. Their children oftentimes come to us and want to make sure that try to keep mom or dad home. And there's many different options there. So, when someone comes to you and they're in such a state and they leave the office saying, I feel better, that makes it all worthwhile. So it kind of evolved representing the state. Then I left the state and started my own practice. And we've evolved into 4 offices all over Connecticut. And it's kind of gratifying at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, you mentioned some of your clients are the people themselves. I'm assuming doing trust and estates work. You also mentioned the kids. What percentage of your clients or clientele do you think is driven by the person who's getting older, or it's really driven by the kids? And I guess the follow-up question would be, how did this change during COVID?
Well, I think believe it or not, the parents often want to talk about this. There was something done by the Boston College Retirement Center where they did a study and they found that more of the parents wanted to talk about end-of-life healthcare, death and dying than their children did. So it was a situation where more parents are coming to the table. During COVID, I think a lot of families came together and COVID, who could have ever predicted that was going to happen? But I think if we can have a pandemic, families that it's time to plan. It's time to get our documents in order. It's time to discuss things that we may not want to discuss. We often have something we call having the talk and getting the whole family in a conference room and answering all their questions. And oftentimes the parents want to be disclosing what the assets are, but that's an extremely important period of time to know, do we have legal documents in place? Are the children empowered if mom or dad are incapacitated? Just because you're their children doesn't mean you have the right to make financial healthcare decisions for them. And it's extremely important that they be able to do that.
That's an interesting point you just made about, the decisions that people need to make. So I guess my question is, contacting you at that point is probably too late, right? So when is the right time to have these conversations with an attorney?
Well, not necessarily, but obviously planning earlier is better in the fact that you can do more advanced financial planning. You can do having more documents in place. But often people think, oh, it's too late. There's nothing we can do. That is absolutely not the case. And in just about every state, if we're talking about a married couple, there's many different planning options for a married couple because there's a community spouse. And since 1988, Congress decided we don't want to have destitute spouses in the community. So therefore, there are specific federal law guidelines and laws to protect the healthier spouse. And a lot of people are not aware of that. And oftentimes there's a misconception too that if I'm trying to protect what I've worked my lifetime for, I'm doing something wrong. I'm doing something illegal or unethical. And that's absolutely not the case. We were aware of that when I was on the other side of the Attorney General's office, and we're aware of that now, that anything we advise people to do is perfectly legal and ethical. And there's many times reasons why they're allowed to keep far more than what they think they can protect. And again, that's when someone comes to the office and they're very relieved to find out, wow, I thought we were going to lose everything, and we're not.
So what are some other myths surrounding long-term care planning? I personally went through this relatively recently with some family members, and I've learned a lot. And I certainly wish I knew more going into it than I do now. But what are some myths for individuals that you've come
Well, some
across a lot?
Yeah, some of the myths are what we just discussed, that you it's too late to plan. We can't protect our home, we can't protect our assets, and that's a big one. And that's kind of in a lot of the different agencies around the country want you to feel that way, and that's just not true. It is a very big part of every state budget, but it's important that we know that there's legal documents that are in place that we can act on our parents' behalf, that it's not too late to plan, that we are capable of getting good care, often at home too. In most states now, they're evolving towards having more 24/7 care because they're realizing it's going to help the state and cost less than 24-hour care in a skilled nursing facility. So I think a lot of people think that, oh, it's too late, there's nothing we can do. It's really important that we have the proper documentation, though, so someone can step into the shoes. Some of the other myths are, just because I'm married to my wife or you're married to your husband, that you have the right and access to their assets. You do not. If there's an IRA or 401k or an account that's in their name alone, you will not have any access to that whatsoever. Oftentimes we hear people say, well, I've named my son under my will as my executor. He'll take care of everything if I need to. Your will means nothing until you pass away. It's important for planning, but there's documents called advance directives that you want to have during your lifetime: a power of attorney for financial purposes, a healthcare representative for, that's what we call it in Connecticut, for empowering someone to be able to make decisions, medical decisions for you if you become incapacitated. So that's what a lot of the myths seem to wrap around.
Dan, what do you think are some of the top concerns that seniors have when they come to you, or that you've heard from even their children?
Some of the biggest concerns are when that we talked about the family meeting or having the talk. Some of the biggest concerns is being a burden on their children. They don't want to be a burden on their children, which is why. And the nice thing is that oftentimes when we get in that meeting setting, the children say, Mom or Dad, that's the furthest thing from the truth. The children don't want to appear greedy, that give us all your money, Mom and Dad. And most times that's not the case. They just want to make sure that they're being taken care of. That's why it's so important. It is extremely important to have legal documents. It's extremely important to educate yourself like this platform does. But it's also important to communicate and get across where I want to live when I get older, if my health fails. Do I want to be at home? Do I want to be in assisted living? Do I have long-term care insurance? If I have all these legal documents, where are they? It doesn't help if it's locked up in a safety deposit box somewhere and people don't have access to it, because we do need to have the originals to bring to the bank, to bring to our financial institutions and access these funds. And it's extremely important that they have that. But oftentimes families, there's years of psychological issues between fights between family members, parent-child relationships that may be strained, and it's a very emotional time, and it's tough sometimes to get beyond that, but it's important that we try to do that. And sometimes we might even have to have a non-family member be appointed, a guardian or a conservator, just to make sure that the senior's protected and we're not dealing with financial elder abuse.
And what's the preparation? The best preparation I could take, Dan, before meeting with you? Is it assembling documents? Is it having conversations with my spouse? Doing my own, inventory of what's important and what kind of a legacy do I want to leave?
Right. It's important that we have the documents, but as we said, it's important that we have dialogue. Also, it's important that we know that there are programs out there. There are special programs for veterans, where if you're a veteran, even if you served, in Connecticut during a wartime, you would still be eligible if you were on active duty. Ways in which you can pay for home care, assisted living, nursing home care. It's important to know that some of these places can't be funded by some of the governmental programs, but some of them very well can be. And a lot of people don't think that they're eligible for these. And that's, getting back to the myths question, that a lot of people are eligible far sooner than they ever thought possible. And they say, well, I have too much money. And in the case of a married couple, that's in many cases, that's just not true in just about all of our 50 states. There are certain protections for married couples. There are certain protections for your home. There's protections if we have an adult disabled child, if we have a sibling who lives with us. So there's many things that are built into the system. I guess one of the big bumpers is also people are afraid sometimes to come see people like me, to see attorneys. They're afraid, oh my gosh, how much is this going to cost? But in a lot of cases, attorneys have free consultations, or they'll have a free phone consultation. It's just important to break the ice and get over that fear, because I can tell you that the cost of attorneys often, in most cases, are far less than the cost of long-term care.
So picking up the phone and calling an attorney, a good move, obviously, but we're talking about a lot of documents, and some of these things sound like they're wills and estates sort of attorneys, and you're talking Eldercare. Could you just define like where the lanes are between those two types of attorneys? And maybe you do both, and maybe they're specialists for a reason.
Yeah, that's a great question. And every attorney is not an elder law attorney. People can say that they're elder law attorneys, but if you don't specialize in this area, it's kind of like going to a foot doctor for a heart problem. You wouldn't do that. There are some overlaps between the documentation, the planning, the tax, etc. But elder law kind of evolved from the public benefits law and the need because of our growing population. If we look at something we have coming called the silver tsunami, that's the baby boomers. The oldest baby boomers now are 76 years old. By the year 2030, all baby boomers will be 65 and older. The numbers are staggering. There's 76 million baby boomers in our country right now. That's going to be an enormous need in this country for long-term care. But not everyone does benefits law. They don't understand the different governmental programs, and it's important that as a consumer, you ask the person who you're going to be consulting with, what percentage of your practice is elder law? How many applications do you do per year? How many plans do you do per year? You're the consumer. You have every right in the world to know. There's even organizations out there like the National Academy of Elder Law Attorney, which I sat on their board for 4 years. It's important to those attorneys putting in extra time, getting extra designations so that they're up to date on all the different legal changes. But we're going to see some big changes, and we're seeing them already based upon the number of seniors that we have in the country.
With the influx coming and the tsunami, is the industry ready for it? Are we ready for that many people aging all together at that point in time? And if so, beautiful. And if not, what do you think needs to take place for us to be ready for that?
Well, we're at a point of great change. And I think that if there was any positive whatsoever that came out of the pandemic, was that people realized things happen. And we need to be prepared, and we need to have documentation. I think a lot of financial and legal institutions are realizing that there's a market out there, and we have to be prepared to address it. But at the same time, as citizens, we need to be aware that seniors have certain rights, and we want to make sure that those rights aren't cast aside with disinformation, again, myths. There was a law change many years ago where they changed how far you have to look back on something, and in my opinion, it was based upon not good facts. So it's important that be active in the political process and be active in protecting ourselves on a state and federal level. But I do believe that we'll be prepared, that the legal and financial institutions will be prepared for it, senior advocates all over the country, because whether we like it or not, it's coming. So we have to be ready. We have to be prepared.
I'll go with another quick question for you here. All these legal docs, how often should they be reviewed, and what's the best process for making sure those are always up to date and with the right person, so when they're needed, they're available?
Well, anytime, if there's a significant change in your life, if there's a death, if there's a marriage, if there's children, grandchildren. We often tell our clients just to come in every 3 to 5 years and just see us. And if there's nothing wrong with the documents, we're going to tell them that. But if there's been a law change, if there's a reason to change the document, then we're going to let them know that. But it's a good habit to get into. You go to see your doctor and your dentist, and you should have your legal checkup too, because things change significantly. And sometimes we think, well, I appointed my son as a power of attorney, but you didn't. You appointed your wife, who may be deceased now, and those things that you want to take care of them when it's not a crisis situation, because it's infinitely harder when we're dealing with a healthcare crisis of an individual, trying to get both their finances and their other documents and everything done at once when we've got so much going on.
How big of a life change is changing state of residency? I was in Connecticut. I'm now in Florida. I was in Maine. I'm now living in Vermont. Is this one of those changes that absolutely says, if this happens, break the glass and talk to Dan?
Absolutely, because every state is different on a lot of governmental programs, even though they're administered by each state, and some are much more giving for seniors, and it's also important too to have your documents reviewed when you leave Connecticut to another state or any changing states, so that there could be nuances that are different in every state, that you want to make sure that you're protecting yourself and have the appropriate documentation for that state, so they'll honor your wills, your powers of attorney, etc. And also, to get educated a bit on what are some of the differences between the state I'm leaving and the state that's now my new residency. And that's important too, that if we have snowbirds, what state are you going to choose as your residency? And there's certain steps that we have to take to make sure that we are truly establishing that this is my residency.
When is the right time, though, to start thinking about all this? So, we're talking about the senior market, but at what point in individuals' life, or does it depend on their individual situation? Should they come and see someone like you, or start thinking about getting their documents in order, or some of the things that you've mentioned? Is there a time where it's too early to begin the conversation, or?
No, absolutely not. If we get married, if we have children, who's going to be the guardians if something happens to both the spouses? Who would be in charge of the finances? At what age would the children receive the funds? It's also important too that to know, unfortunately, we're seeing cases of younger and younger patients with Alzheimer's, early onset Alzheimer's, and it's scary. But again, in many cases, they do have the appropriate documents. They do know that there's options available to them. So it's far earlier than 65, or that you really want to start considering what your options are. If you're looking into things like long-term care insurance, the earlier you start, the less expensive it's going to be for you, and there may come a point where you're uninsurable. So those are things that you want to explore at a much younger age. Retirement planning too, to make sure that you're doing all the appropriate steps and getting ready for it whenever that day may come.
What's the most important thing you think someone can do to prepare? Like years ago, I don't remember the stat exactly, but lots of people don't have wills, right? It's a little scary.
Right. Yes.
Thinking about elder care specifically, is there something people should be putting in place, immediately?
Probably document preparation, understanding that there's options available to them, seeking information like this platform, and just sometimes when we do public speaking, people come up and say, I'm really glad I spent this extra hour here because you brought things to my attention that we weren't even thinking about, that we didn't know existed, and that little bit of effort and educating yourself can go a long way. People often come to me and they say, well, what's the magic bullet of protecting my assets? Well, part of it is communication. Part of it is educating yourself. Part of it is knowing, the differences if we are going between two states, which state would benefit us more to be a resident of. So those are things that you would definitely want to take into consideration.
On that communication trend, have you seen changes in forms of communication? Obviously, during the pandemic, I'd imagine nearly everything was a virtual conversation, but the way that you have to communicate with individuals, whether they are the client directly, the elder individual, or the adult children working with you, how has that evolved since you've begun your practice?
Well, we didn't have things like this when I started, but it's important, and I think it's kind of trends along the lines of telemedicine, that it's people can gain more access to attorneys. Every state has differences in what they would accept for signatures, witnessing documents. It may be good if someday we get to documents that we can sign virtually. So just it's better to have that than to have nothing. But I think we're going to have to keep changing at least the legal profession to adapt and to be what people are going to be expecting. And I think the telemedicine example has worked out fabulous. People are able to have more constant contact with their physicians, with their specialists. The same would be true, for the practice of law, which was expedited by the pandemic. And again, it just on a more basic level, knowing that they need to address these issues came to a head during that, because my God, if the whole country, the whole world can get shut down, then things could possibly happen to me also. So I want to make sure we get our ducks in a row.
Yeah, just to pull a string that Joseph, tugged on earlier, Dan, is there, like, I don't know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs for family law? Like, at a very minimum, you must have the following, like some sort of a health. I should know the name, but like a power of attorney for health. Do you have any sort of list of, like, you must have this, and it'd be nice if you finally have this thing at the very, end of the process?
Absolutely. And just about at any age, if you're an adult, you should have a will. You should have a power of attorney appointing your spouse or a family member or somebody you trust. When you get into those types of conversations, if you have 4 children and one's a doctor, one's a lawyer, one still lives in the basement, you probably don't want to appoint that person. You need to think about who you want to appoint, but you'd want to make sure you have a will at a minimum. In some cases, it's appropriate for a trust. Again, if we get back to the family that owns property in several different states, you want a financial power of attorney, that someone can be making financial decisions for you if you're incapacitated. And people need to understand too that these documents, because there's often a fear, oh my gosh, if I give this to my son or my daughter, they're going to be telling me what to do. That's not true. The documents can be revoked at any time. If you are appointing someone, they're supposed to act in a fiduciary capacity, meaning acting in your best interest. But at a minimum, you should have a financial power of attorney, a living will giving direction to your family if you were terminally ill, how you'd want to be treated. And when the time to sign these documents are not when you're lying in a gurney in the hospital. You want to have this discussion. You want to have these documents signed. There's also that the healthcare representative is what we call it in Connecticut, so that someone can step into our shoes and make those decisions. And you want that to be, one of your loved ones. You don't want it to be a total stranger. My law partner and I are often appointed by the court to make decisions for people we haven't even met before. And it's a really uncomfortable situation, but unfortunately it has to happen. So you'd want to have those documents in place. As we get closer to retirement, we might want to make sure that we're exploring the use of a trust, making sure that all of our retirement accounts are in order, and making sure we're consulting with the appropriate people as we get gearing up for retirement.
Dan, just more on a personal note, what's your proudest moment in this career you've had?
That's a great question. Probably numerous times where people come into the office and they are completely distraught. Their loved ones ill. Their life has changed forever, and they leave saying that they still have, that there's still options available for them. So that would probably can't specify one particular time, but that's it's a good feeling. It's a good feeling to help families out when they're at their worst possible time.
So giving you some hope, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And here's a technical question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Does the lawyer need to be licensed in the state that you live, or can you work with an elder lawyer in any state?
Well, you probably should work with a lawyer who's licensed in that state for knowing all the nuances of that unique state. If you start, consulting with someone who's not licensed in another state, they could be missing a very key component. There's some laws regarding the unauthorized practice of law if you are trying to do that without being admitted to the bar. So you'd really want to work with someone who is familiar with the local territory. So that's.
Dan, I'm going to go back to your practice. It sounds as though you have a few offices. You've been doing this successfully for some time now. You likely could have done anything you wanted. Why this?
Well, I think I got my start with the Attorney General's office, and I saw that there was a need. It was a growing area of the law. I was fascinated by some of the other attorneys who were doing this in private practice, and it has and continues to grow year by year. You're able to bring about change. We've been involved legislatively. I was the national chairman for the National Academy of Elder Attorneys Senior Political Committee, and we were able to advocate and see some laws changed on a federal level, and that's something that's extremely important. The growth is amazing, and it's just going to continue into the future. There was even a statistic that at one point there's going to be more seniors than there are younger people in the country, and that's hopefully that's not the case, because there comes all kinds of funding issues. But there's been a lot of change, but I think that we're seeing a lot of positive change too. There's certain organizations that are popping up, not just in the United States, but around the world, where they're looking at aging in a different way. And that's one of the great things about the baby boomers. They've changed everything as they've moved through the process. And I like one of the commercials out there that says, what if my retirement plan is not to retire? And different ways of looking at it, and not just cookie cutter or trying to be more unique with telemedicine and other options of ways of living, so that it'll be a better quality of life for our seniors down the road.
Yeah, well, Dan, this has been a terrific conversation. Joseph, do you have any final questions or thoughts?
That's something most people probably don't think about and probably need to think about. So I'm glad we had this little chat today. And Dan, you shared a lot of great insights.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, Laura, how about you?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we had a family situation where this is quite familiar to me. So it's great to have this conversation. I think it's wonderful to be able to share the information broadly so more people can be prepared and educated as they go through their own journeys.
Great.
Yeah, Mary.
I mean, it was great to reconnect with Dan because I've known him for many years. And I loved that. I love the passion that you have around this area of law, because as you were saying earlier, the silver tsunami. And so there's going to be a lot more need. And it seems like, based on what I know of you, that you also bring a lot of empathy and kindness and caring into, your law practice and meeting with people, as you said earlier, when they're sometimes very distraught. So I think we're fortunate to have someone like you in this area of law. So, thank you for spending time with us today. And you've enlightened us quite a bit. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been enjoyable.
Yeah, Dan. Hey, listen, thanks so much. We'll put links to your firm. I think we can do that right in the podcast. And appreciate the time. And it's great to find somebody who is passionate about being there for families when they really need them. So thanks. And listen, thanks everybody for being on the show today. Thanks to our listeners, and join us again next week for another episode of the Prime Life Podcast. Thanks.